Distinguished guests, please be seated and ensure your mobile phones are on silent mode as we are going to commence our event soon. Thank you. Yang berbahagia, Distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Rajah Rasiah, Executive Director of the Asia Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, Dr. Adil Johan, Deputy Executive Director for Academic and Student Affairs, Asia Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, selamat datang and a very warm welcome to the Memorial Forum in honor of Professor Zawawi Ibrahim. To begin the forum, we would like to call Dr. Adil Johan, Deputy Executive Director for Academic and Student Affairs, Asia Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, for his welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and good afternoon. I would like to start with a moment of silence and quiet recitation of Al-Fatiha for Allah Yarham Wan Zawawi Ibrahim. To the family of Allah Yarham Professor Wan Zawawi Ibrahim, Dr. Norsha Saleh, Rendra Zawawi, Hameer Zawawi, Distinguished Professor Rajah Rasiah, Executive Director of the Asia Europe Institute, Distinguished Professor Shamsul Amri Baharuddin, Founding Director of KITA, the Institute of Ethnic Studies, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, Gareth Richards, Director of Gerak Budaya Penang, Professor Sharmani Gabriel, Dr. Jun-E Tan, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, honored guests, friends and family, a very warm welcome. Now, unlike some of the academics and professional colleagues remembering Zawawi here today, my first encounters with him were both personal and musical. My parents were close friends with Zawawi and his wife Norsha, and I remember hearing stories and seeing a photo of Zawawi and Norsha serenading my mother in our house in Penang when she was still pregnant with me. That musical relationship materialized when I returned to Malaysia from studying music in Canada. I was starting my career as a music lecturer and professional jazz musician in Kuala Lumpur in 2007. That's 18 years ago. He was excited to hear that I was pursuing music seriously, and he invited me to his Section 11 house in Petaling Jaya for a rehearsal. There were at least seven musicians hanging out and jamming, playing music for Zawawi. These included my close friend and collaborator, Azmil Yuno, who I met for the first time that night. I would go on to play saxophone for Zawawi's numerous performances across the Klang Valley. This included a landmark gig at Kuala Lumpur's premier music venue, No Black Tie. Now, most of Zawawi's professional colleagues who are remembering and honoring his work today will emphasize his contributions to anthropology, cultural studies, and Malaysian studies, and so on. By contrast, for now, I would like to give voice to his contributions as a musician and songwriter. I also want to note the legacy of his passion for music and the arts as exemplified by his children. As a composer-songwriter, Zawawi wrote for Malay recording artists Sharifah Aini, Khatijah Ibrahim, Ella M. Nasir, Ramli Sarip, and the rock bands Search and Kopratasa. I'm probably missing some artists as well in this list. Notably, he recorded a full-length studio album titled Dayung, released in 1996, which included the songs Anak Dunia, Sewaktu di Sisi, Bebaslah, which you'll actually hear later, I think, Mencari America, and its haunting title track, which I truly love, Dayung, which featured the late Temuan Orang Asli storyteller Minah Anak Kuntum, also known as Mak Minah. Being a full-time academic perhaps denied him the time and opportunity to extensively tour the country to perform his songs to the Malaysian public. However, he would always find opportunities to perform his music in Kuching, Brunei, and Kuala Lumpur, and I'm going to do more research to find out what other countries he performed at. But you can find a playlist of his live performance recorded in the late 2000s in No Black Tie, Kuala Lumpur, on YouTube, and I highly recommend that you search on YouTube Dr. Wan Zawawi No Black Tie. You can also actually purchase his album Dayung upstairs, actually being sold by his family members. There's a table up at the top of the auditorium, which will then move downstairs for during refreshments. So you can actually buy that CD today, Dayung. Highly recommend it. Now, Zawawi's love for music is evident in his 3 children. Kaisha, who unfortunately is in England and not here with us today, Hameer and Rendra, and they have all chosen the path of music in their careers, not academia. Kaisha is currently a prolific recording artist in the UK with numerous singles and an EP. She has released 5 music videos and currently has over 100,000 monthly listeners on her Spotify page, where her single Can't Get Enough has over 3 million listens on Spotify. That's very impressive. Hameer, who you will be hearing later today, is an amazing singer-songwriter who released a full-length album called National Fantasy in 2016 and spent about a year touring the United States. For me, he is perhaps the most innately talented musical being that I have ever met. Rendra Zawawi studied music in Berklee College of Music, Boston, and proceeded to become a well-regarded music composer of TV series and films while being based in Los Angeles. He's also famously credited as the composer for the song Arina Cahaya that was featured in the 2016 Malaysian film Ola Bola. And he also composed the score for the film M for Malaysia, directed by Dian Lee and Ineza Rusil in 2019. And just a quick announcement, we are actually having a special film screening in AI. It's been a long time coming, but we are having a film screening in collaboration with the Russia House. It's a documentary on the Muslims, on the history of Islam in Russia. So we're doing this on Saturday at 3 p.m. For those of you who are free, especially my students, please come to AI, Saturday, 3 p.m. I wonder if Gareth is still here, we'll see. But yes, it is clear from all the examples I listed above about his children that Zawawi's passion and dedication for music and the arts lives on in the pursuits of his children. But perhaps it is in the lyrics of his songs in which we find the true essence of who he was, what he believed in, his charming cynicism, his hopes for the future, but also his uncanny ability to foreshadow the cyclical nature of global social inequality, injustice, and Western imperialism. He released the song Mencari Amerika, translated as Looking for America, in 1996. So back then, American popular culture was well established and globally ubiquitous. America was everywhere in everything, on TV and films, on products consumed by everyone around the world. Somewhat like it is now, but I think that has changed. Somehow, though, in the wake of Trump's current America, Zawawi's lyrics still ring true, albeit in a different light. So here's an excerpt from the song Mencari Amerika. Di sini, Amerika. Sini sana, Amerika. Mana-mana Amerika. Ku mencari Amerika. Di mana Amerika? America is here. America is everywhere. America is anywhere. I'm searching for America. Where is America? Despite America's seemingly waning influence, Trump's America seems to dominate our daily discourse on the global economy, world peace or lack thereof in Gaza, Myanmar, Ukraine, for example. And such discourse continues to spark conversations about social inequality and the contested nature of human rights. So following this forum, I hope we may further explore the poetic texts of Zawawi's songs and how he often spoke of social inequality, environmental justice, and the plight of humanity. In my view, Zawawi's music offered a means to give voice to the vulnerable. This was a term coined by Prof. Rajah and I, working with Prof. Rajah. A voice to the vulnerable, marginalized, and oppressed. And I am sure that such insights on his scholarship in particular will continue to be discussed in this forum. For me, Zawawi Ibrahim will forever be Malaysia's foremost musician scholar. Many thanks, everyone, and welcome to AEI.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. We will now screen a video excerpt of Professor Zawawi Ibrahim's last lecture in the University of Brunei.
Okay, I think we can start with the proceedings this afternoon, which looks like with this daunting technology in front of us, it's not going to be a seminar, it's going to be a performance. It's going to be occasion, which I gather then goes on to, through Liam here, our techno expert, it's going to go onto YouTube, and then I guess within 48 hours it'll go viral. Will it? Yeah. Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce an old friend and colleague, Professor Zawawi. A kind of pleasure to introduce him, but the sort of tinge of sadness that he's leaving us, but I'm sure he'll stay in constant and frequent contact with us. He's among one of the most prominent Malaysian senior social scientists, I should say. If you just look at his Google citations and the kinds of things he's published, and he's published very widely. I mean, I think he is eclectic, diverse in the kinds of interests that he's had. I first came across his work, his published work, in the 1980s when he was working on, we used to call them peasantries in those days.
Yes,
I think this is this sort of term concept has maybe gone a little bit out of favor. But his work on the Malay peasantry and the Malay labour as well, that I got to know his work. He then went on, of course, to publish on various other indigenous populations of Malaysia, the Orang Asli and Semenanjung, the indigenous peoples of Sarawak and Sabah as well. He then became, and this is where I first met him, he was very much involved in development issues and environmental change in Southeast Asia, and we first met in a conference in the Netherlands. We were talking about 1990, something like that.
Or 5.
Yeah, and then he kindly contributed to an occasional paper series that I was involved in the University of Hull in Southeast Asian Studies at that time. And if I get the title right, Regional Development in Rural Malaysia and the Tribal Question. He published that with us in 1995. And then I was editing a book on environmental challenges in Southeast Asia, which came out in 1998. And Prof. Wan kindly contributed an epilogue to that volume, a Southeast Asian perspective on the environment, which I much valued. And I think it's a very important paper that you wrote for us. Since then, we've done all kinds of things together. I've contributed to edited books in the Asia in Transition series with IAS Springer. We've co-edited a couple of books. Oh, yes, yeah. Co-edited a couple of books together with Nur Hasharina, and this doorstep of a book on Borneo, if it has no other value, if you happen to have drafts in your apartment or house and you need to keep your door open, just shove our book against it, and I guarantee the door will not move. This is 600 pages of text. It's an enormous book. And then we did, with the kind help of Paul Carnegie, who's here, Human Insecurities in Southeast Asia. And Paul, with one, kind of rescued this book. It was now really wilderness for a while. But now I think we're benefiting from that book and other things that are developing from it. I'll spend another couple of minutes. Prof. Wan, I think he'll be known here, and his colleagues here and students here, for his teaching in Asian anthropology and his work on popular culture as well. If you look at some of the titles of his published work on popular culture, they're rather exciting. The Search for a New Cinema, which I think is a really good paper. Malay Contemporary Music, disciplining rock music. How do you discipline rock music? And then for Bruneians, Malay metalheads situating metal music culture in Brunei. You should read that. Anyway, he's not only teaching and researching in popular culture, but he actually does it, and he's going to do it this afternoon. As you know, he sings, he plays the guitar, he composes his own work. This is his swan song, and
but I'm not a swan.
I mean, this is a popular term. We use this all the time, and I had no idea what it meant. I mean, I thought, well, then I Googled it in Wikipedia. I thought, what was a swan song? Apparently, a swan never sings, but on the eve of its departure, it breaks out into a beautiful voice. I've never heard a swan sing, anyway, but we'll hear you sing in a moment. And I think just on the paper that he's presenting us this afternoon, I think he's championed collaboration between not only scholars in Southeast Asia, but more widely in Asia. But what I think he's also done is try to bridge the gap, which I think some scholars continue to want to keep, that gap between Western scholarship and Asian scholarship. And I think one has done important work in trying to bring scholarship together wherever it occurs. And I think that's terribly important. And I think he's going to talk about this afternoon in making transnational scholarship in the periphery. So it's sort of over to you then, Juan, with your swan song. And I don't know when you're going to sing, later, I suppose. Before or after?
I think I'll blink the eyes now and sing.
Of Issues of Debate by Emeritus Professor Victor T. King, Professor of Borneo Studies in the Institute of Asian Studies, University Brunei Darussalam, and Emeritus Professor of Southeast Asian Studies in the University of Leeds. The presentation will be delivered by Mr. Gareth Richards, Director of Gerak Budaya Bookshop and former academic. We invite Mr. Gareth Richards to give his presentation.
Thank you very much, Alia, and thank you very much, Adil, for the invitation to be here this afternoon. It's a very, very emotional moment for me for an obvious reason, because this is about memorializing a very dear friend, Wan Zawawi, but it's also 20 years exactly since I stood in this very same auditorium. I used to teach here 20 years ago. Where's the time flown to? I feel like a bit of an imposter. So the words that follow are not mine. I am Victor Terence King, just in case, you see. I mean, I very much look like him, or people say I speak like him. Terry very much wanted to be here with us, if not in person, then via video link. Unfortunately, a sign of the times and his age, he had a hospital appointment in Leeds this afternoon. So he compelled me, I think that's in a very soft way, he compelled me to actually work on his presentation together, and I would actually deliver it. So if you have any queries or qualms or contestations with what I'm going to say, please address them to Victor Terence King in Leeds. So these are the words that Terry has put together for this session, and a little bit of it rehearses what he just said in that introduction video, which was Wan's final public seminar performance after 11 years that he spent at University Brunei Darussalam. And Terry King and Wan Zawawi very much worked together over the course of that decade, and that was, as he said, the swan song. I'm now moving into my Victor King voice. Okay, it's Victor King. Okay. I would like to rehearse my collaboration with Wan Zawawi. Our collegial encounters go back a long way. In a panel I chaired in July 1994 at the EuroCS conference in Leiden, Wan provided a paper which we then published in the Centre for Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Hull. Thus begun a quarter of a century of working together and of enduring friendship. At times, we differed in our views, mainly in relation to our perspectives and priorities, to the understanding of the societies and cultures of Southeast Asia. I am a British-trained sociologist, anthropologist, and one, a Malaysian social scientist, although trained in Australia. In the debates about insiders and outsiders, In the debates about insiders and outsiders, Western social science and the possibility of alternative discourses, which was very much a Wan Zawawi phrase, and the escape from the captive mind, to mention Syed Hussein Alatas, did this really matter in my collaboration with Wan? I don't think it did. Scholarship transcends borders, not only in the West, but across continents. What was interesting about my collaboration with Wan was that he directed it. I was the subaltern. He was the Malaysian intellectual. He had the ideas, and in Wan's words, I was the synthesizer, turning the scramble of ideas and materials into an acceptable narrative or text, suitable for an academic audience. We recognized this, and we saw it as teamwork. We complemented one another. We were not competing for prowess. Why should we? We weren't bent on scoring points. We were academics working together for a common goal: advancement of knowledge and publishing what we discovered and rediscovered. We spent long hours debating Southeast Asia and Malaysia. We disagreed on some matters, agreed on others. But I never saw our relationship in terms of binaries: East versus West, Orang Asing, Orang Asli, Western hegemony, Eastern dependence. The notion of Orientalism was furthest from our minds. In fact, I was the dependent in the scheme of things with Wan. I suppose you could say he was the thinker and I was the doer. This brings me to a debate with Syed Farid Alatas, who unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon, of which Wan Zawawi was conscious, but always addressed it not to the grand scheme of things, but to specific issues in understanding Southeast Asia and bringing Western social scientists to task if they got it wrong. I raise it again, and it was an issue which I drew attention to in the chapter on Syed Hussein Alatas, Syed Farid's father. I concur, alternative discourses can act to modify, qualify, and set conditions to the Western-derived concepts and perspectives. Syed Farid has clarified that in his search for alternative discourses, he is pursuing a universal and not a parochial social science, arguing for a merger between alternative discourses rather than simply replacing or modifying one discourse with another. This discussion also suggested various levels of engagement and interaction between Western and non-Western theories. But I no longer operate with theories. I refer you to Aiwa Ong. Like her, I have dispensed with theories. She says she does not do theory. Rather, she does concept work. I remember vividly at a keynote paper I presented at the Persatuan Sains Social Malaysia meeting in Kuching in 2008, and I introduced the notion of jobbing in relation to applied social science. One was in the audience. He questioned whether this was a professional or scholarly way of research. I think I responded that much of what I had done in my academic career was moving between ideas and practice. And for me, that was jobbing. Forget theory. It merely serves to enhance the pretensions of senior academics whose careers are built on theory. I prefer concepts. Returning to Iwa Ong, not only does she eschew the division between the Western intellectual and cultural traditions and so-called native or post-colonial scholarship, she says it's not an issue of the West versus the rest. I could not agree more, in that it chimes with my skepticism about the insider-outsider binary and with the alternative, locally generated discourses as against Western social science. My main point here is that we now are mature enough to set aside these ancient debates about West and East. Let's forget them. Get together. Pool our resources. In anthropological mode, one was addressing this, but at a local level. He corrected outsider views of his homeland, but I do not think he generally challenged Western social science and brought it into a grand scheme. Of course, Western social scientists got it wrong at times, very wrong. But we are part of a global humanity, and the social and cultural configurations and processes, wherever we reside, obviously provide us with differences. But there are also deeply embedded similarities and the desire to share and not to construct intellectual boundaries. I met one at UKM after my Anthropology of Southeast Asia with William Wilder was published in 2003. He gave me a hard time. And then he published his views in the Asian Journal of Social Sciences in 2010. I accepted his criticisms. If ever I produce a revised edition of the book, I will incorporate his views. Looking back at that book, which was the first attempt to produce an anthropology of Southeast Asia, it was too Western-oriented. One was right. We did not pay sufficient attention to local scholarship, nor did we give sufficient space to local scholars in Malaysia who had studied peasant societies and rural laborers, as one Zawawi had, nor did we give sufficient attention to those deemed, in Goh-Beng Lan's terms, public intellectuals. I think this was missing in the book, and I accepted one's criticisms. If ever I get around to writing a revised edition, I will recognize that we were preoccupied with our Western selves. I suppose my only justification is that I was fighting a corner for the study and promotion of Southeast Asian studies in the UK, and there hardly anyone is interested in Southeast Asia. Turning now to one of one's last major pieces of writing. He wrote, to my mind, what was an outstanding chapter for a book I edited with Jeremy James, Fieldwork and the Self, Changing Research Styles in Southeast Asia. His chapter was titled The Anthropology of Remembering, Memory as a Complementary Ethnography. No one else could have written this paper. It is innovative. Certainly a foreign social scientist like me could not have conjured this. One used his memories of his coming of age in Terengganu as an ethnography. It certainly opened up my eyes in seeing the world that they inhabited in their childhood and in their youth as a field of exploration into the human condition. One has revealed it for us in a Malaysian context. Traversing what we did together, it goes back some 25 years, and I value it immensely. It's worth highlighting some of the research and publishing projects that we worked on together. They're quite substantial, they're quite outstanding. And I was the editor for all 4 of these volumes. What were my memorable times and moments with Wan? There were many, such as evenings in his house in Brunei, when the family hosted university colleagues with young Bruneian musicians serenading us. Of course, Wan also provided entertainment. He was conscious of the lack of live performance in Brunei, and he provided every encouragement and opportunity for local musicians to perform. I also remember his rather alternative taste in clothing. He was one of the most sartorial academics I've ever met. There was an evening in Chiang Mai after a conference at the university when I went with him and with Norsha to the Anusan night market. One noted for his hats, his caps, his scarves, his Indian and kurta blouson shirts, and in imaginative trousers and his suede boots, probably visited every single shop in the market, trying on every single piece of clothing. We ended up in a cafe where he borrowed the resident singer's guitar and he performed. A final remembrance. Without Wan Zawawi, Malaysian social science would have had an enormous gap in its scholarly enterprise. Wan heard the voices of the minorities, and he expressed them eloquently on their behalf. I always saw him as an anthropologist of the people, concerned, engaged, and a loyal Malaysian. He always wanted to make Malaysia a better place to live. I will always remember my time with Wan, memories of his music, his scholarship, and his friendship are for keeps. His contributions to our understanding of Malaysian society, culture, and history, and his comparative work on the wider Southeast Asia are terribly, terribly important. He was, and he remains, my Malaysian brother, a warm, engaging, friendly, innovating, inspirational human being. I miss him, and I will never forget him.
Thank you, Mr. Gareth. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To begin our discussion, may I invite to the stage our esteemed panel of speakers, Distinguished Professor Shamsul Amri Baharuddin, Founding Director of Institute of Ethnic Studies, KITA, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, Professor Sharmani Patricia Gabriel, Department of English in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, Universiti Malaya, Dr. Jun-E Tan, Senior Research Associate at Khazanah Research Institute, and Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of the International Movement for a Just World, JUST. I also wish to invite our esteemed moderator for this forum, Distinguished Professor Dr. Rajah Rasiah. Professor, the floor is yours. It's not on, I think.
Thank you, Alia. In the interest of time, shall I just wish you all, as distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To honor a professor who taught me when I was an undergrad, I should start with some words. I've known him from 1979, although I began my undergraduate work in 78. I was a student of business, specializing in accounting, but I did all my elective courses in the social sciences, including, at that time, management was rooted in social sciences, so that made it that much easier before they became a faculty on its own. Zawawi himself had just got back from Australia, and then, of course, he was teaching not really anthropology, he was teaching development studies. The two elective courses that I did with him, it's important to mention, because one tends to distinguish different types of anthropologists. If you go to Marshall Sahlins, his kind of work, Islands of History, will be capturing exactly what goes on the ground. But Zawawi was a different type, although you can't possibly use the sort of terms Karl Marx would have used, praxis, for example. He was more of the weapons of the weak type, the book by James Scott, Everyday Resistance and so on. He had this notion of transforming people, not the Marshall Sahlins type. Marshall Sahlins type was to retain them the way they are. We should not make an imperial effort to transform them. So I could see that sort of differences in him, yet this all taught in the field of development studies, development theory and so on. Somehow he managed to advance these things. And I remember him fondly because he wanted me to do anthropology, something I didn't do. But of course, when he passed on, he had just talked to me 2 days before that. It somehow touched me, and therefore I felt I need to do something that he wanted me to do. And therefore the book, you all will hear more about the book, which Dr. Adil mentioned just now. He mentioned about the voices of the vulnerable. And of course, he's very much engaged in that. But I just wanted to say a few more things before I introduce the speakers. One had many talents. He and me were in the University academic soccer team. He was a great winger. Did you know about it? He played for Monash too. He was scoring many goals. He was very speedy. He wasn't really very good in squash. Everybody talks about having beaten one. Please, he was a great soccer player. And in the same team, they had Kamal Salih, whom we were going to honor. He was a great center half, also a Monash soccer player, and of course, many others who excelled in sports. I think it was in that sort of, but he was also, to me, a great billiard player. I was a poor billiard player. I could have done much better in soccer, but not billiard. He could play, he could actually hit billiard balls, not like Efren Rice, perhaps, but he could score by playing from the back. I saw him do that in '86. Now let's get to the speakers now. I think because I myself have a class from 6 to 9. Now, instead of using in the typical Zawawi Ibrahim, I'm not using the word one because many times when a mentor speaks to you, I look up to him. Don't ever use the word one. He's not a Kelantanese. These are words from him. He was from Besut, often misunderstood as a Kelantanese because of the one there. So I don't call him one because of what he told me to do. And in the spirit of USM then, which I didn't see so much here, in USM we were always told, don't call Professor Chandra, don't call Professor Kamal. So we used to drop all those names. Although of course in the faculty that was rooted, people didn't like that. You had to call them Dr. something or Professor something in business. But in that spirit, just to not to use that, we just call each one of us here as Gareth Richards. We can call Shamsul. I'm sure I call him Bapak Professor because he's one of those great professors articulating on anthropology. Now coming back to this, of course you all know that Shamsul is a distinguished professor. He was a pioneering one in the field of anthropology. Although we only have 4 now, right? 1 passed on. From the Ministry of Higher Education, and then the rest of the details I'll just selectively mention. He held the UNESCO chair, which is a very complimentary position there. And he also got the Fukuoka Prize for his academic advancements. I suppose we then now move to Professor Shamani. Although she's very familiar with me, I still have to look at all this. She's been working on post-colonial studies with a focus on transgressive and transformative possibilities of cultural struggle. She serves on the editorial and advisory boards of several peer-reviewed journals, books, and so on. And then she has also served as professor and head of department, English department. And of course, she had visiting positions at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Now we go on to Chandra. The reason I'm doing this so that the discussion becomes seamless. Otherwise, it's somewhat disjointed with all these narratives. Chandra is the president of the International Movement of the Just World and an international NGO-based body. But of course, I, apart from him teaching me 2 courses too, I learned a lot from him. I'm sure he knows some of the things that that he taught me. And of course, he's got a number of books too, including Reflections on Malaysian University and Other Challenges. He led the Aliran movement, which was to me a very inspiring movement. And he's still around and doing well. Now, I then moved to someone who's new to me, Dr. Jun-E Tan, is a senior research associate at Khazanah Research Institute. Her current research interests include digital rights and artificial intelligence governance in the context of Southeast Asia and Malaysia. She holds a PhD from Nanyang Technological University. Let me, I suppose I've been directed by my able deputy director that I should give them all 10 minutes. I think it's, let's hold on to that so that we will have more time. You can always come back with additional time and so on. But I feel maybe we extend it a bit only because Sharmani told me she needs at least 15 minutes. So since I believe in equitable rights, I think I shall give all of them 15 minutes. I hope you don't mind doing that. And although I feel we should start with women, but let's not have this feeling about because it seems to give the suggestion, the impression that they are in an inferior position and therefore we start with them. I shall just begin from the left. Let's start with Bapak Professor Shamsul.
Thank you, Rajah.
You can also speak there if you wish to.
No, that looks like a politician. Assalamualaikum, selamat sejahtera dan juga selamat Hari Raya. Let me tell you what I used to talk to one. The rest you can read about him. But what do I talk to him about? And this is, for me, is quite important in the sense that despite of the fact that he writes all in English, please look for his Malay article, you can't find it. But he talks about when can we create this knowledge based on Malay language. So he talks about West and East, and within the East, he's talking about national language. So he asked me, you come from the National University of Malaysia, how much Malay books you have produced? I can't answer him for 5 minutes. I'm trying to figure out what are the books that I have read in Malay produced by UKM scholars. Yeah, but it's interesting why, I asked him, why are you concerned about this? Well, we don't become like India. English is one knowledge, and Hindi is one knowledge, and Tamil is another knowledge, and so on and so forth, he said. So it was quite interesting the way he sees knowledge beyond this West and East and Western, but he was looking inside in Malaysia. So he asked me, so my first defense was, my first book was in Malay. Okay, don't ask me any more contribution in Malay, I say, because all my articles are in Malay. So the debate was about when we can read anthropology books in Malay. So I think the question he raised is not so much about the language issue, but I think about how do we deliver this knowledge that we have to the majority in the country? To what? How could they have access to this knowledge? So we talk about all sorts of stuff, theory, concept, and so on, but how many people will actually read this stuff? Except those enrolled at anthropology department probably, or in some local university. So that was the issue that we keep on thinking, and thinking and finding ways how to contribute to this. And translation, of course, is a big issue. We have Institute Terjemahan Negara, but they prefer to translate English to Malay. But how about Malay to English? Because some, and then we started, the project that we started was to look at PhDs. How many PhDs in English use a lot of Malaysian material in their references? And how many Malay theses actually overwhelmed by English references? So it's quite interesting when we went deeper and we look at the way this knowledge is being used and referred to. So that was what thesis that I examined, and I showed one. It's on the new economic policy. And I don't want to mention this name because it's been published, this book. And we went through the footnote and we went through the bibliography. Then we realized out of the 300 or 280 references, it's only 2 in Malay. So it's quite interesting for me that one asked me the right question and I have no answer for it. Yeah. So in some ways, his concern is not simply like what Gareth said on behalf of Victor King. I think by working in Brunei, he begins to see what happens in Semenanjung, Sabah, and Sarawak. He works in Sarawak. I mean, he's the only academic that I know who worked in 9 different universities. My God, he's not only a busker, a singer, but he's also basking his knowledge in 9 different institutions in this region. So it's quite interesting for me to see this debate that he has about knowledge is not about just simply West and East, but also what is it that you want to develop in this country. So that was my discussion with him. I think 3 years before he left Brunei. Because in Brunei, he has a different group of people he's working with compared to, because he was working with me for 5-6 years in Atma. So we have a different group of people. So the network they has built is many layered network, I call it. And each inform his thinking about knowledge. So he's interested in knowledge. He's not interested in anthropology. He's not only interested in music, but he also knowledge in music. So probably, as I said to him, when Adil came to join us, A1, Adil is a totally credible, qualified musician. Who are we? I said, you pop singer lah. I said, nothing else. I said, So we used to rubbish each other on this supposed achievement. So at least I joined a band that won the Juara Kugiran in Malaysia. I said, so what kind of singing you're doing, man? You see, Shamsul, your public advocacy is writing article in newspaper. My public advocacy is writing songs. That's where I surrender lah. So it's quite interesting. Again, he's emphasizing the platform you choose to share your knowledge. Yeah? And this is where I think the experience of having this network in 9 different universities, and also, of course, like me, we went to conferences every year, 3 or 4 times, presenting not the same paper, but for different conferences, nearly the same paper. So we find that. So we ultimately argued that, do you want to write a book or a paper one? So when he came out with his public lecture, inaugural lecture, I think here, was it here? Yeah, I didn't attend because I was somewhere else. And I read that paper. That is the best paper. The best what one has produced for anthropology. So I was very happy to see how in his paper he actually debate on the origin of the knowledge that was that was embedded in the way we construct our intellectual tradition in this country. And he focused on the colonial period as well as the post-colonial period, when he moved from colonial scholars, administrators, to academic researchers. So this is where one, in that lecture, for the first time, I feel that we actually did work on Malay peasantry. I mean, he's doing his work on a plantation, but most of his work was actually on Malay peasantry. So that is why his paper, when he said the anthropology of Malay peasantry, it is really representing what he has done, what a group of us have done, and interestingly, the 3 or 4 of us are all graduate from Monash from one professor, Professor Michael Swift, who is an anthropologist. So it's quite interesting how, and we always trace anthropology, Michael Swift, who's the teacher of Michael Swift? Raymond Firth. Who is teacher of Raymond Firth? Malinowski. So kita ni anak cucu Malinowski tau. So all this kind of talk that we have, we are very proud of our pedigree, so to speak, and our genealogy. But I think the most striking thing that he has achieved is to combine 2 creativities, music and anthropology. And we always believe that by combining this, we did not make anthropology boring. And we did not make music boring too. So I think this is where both of us always find time to sing together, to do things, and to talk about not so much academic, but the nature of knowledge. So this is where another debate developed between us. He talked about theories, concepts, and as Victor King said, he preferred concept instead of theories and whatnot. So I said to one, actually, it's not concept and theories. I'm teaching Malaysian students who can have understood or quarter understood Karl Marx, I said, but they have to refer to these books because we give them as references. So how do we teach these guys? Yeah. How do we teach these guys this complicated knowledge? I said. So in the end, we agreed that what we are going to work in order to make sure this knowledge and theories and concepts be understood by our students is to develop what we call analytical tools. How do we make it easier or accessible, this knowledge, not by teaching theory, not teaching concept, but I'm teaching you an analytical tool, how to dissect this issue of how do we dissect social problems. So if we can see it that way, it's much easier than trying to apply half a Marx, quarter of Weber, and also 5% of Talcott Parson. So it's quite interesting how our discussions between us all the time is about how do we improve the way we teach this anthropology to our students. So not only from the thesis supervision, but also from the way we think, the way we, I think a few of them are here, my PhD students, former PhD students, I can see our friend Asma is there. So I think in many ways, this discussion I had with one actually improved the way we teach this knowledge called anthropology, but also in Malay, how do we make sure that the references, Chong is there, he publishes all the book that we have. So in many ways, I think we need help from our colleagues. So one lasting contribution to me is to continuously interrogate and question, not knowledge per se, but colonial knowledge. We seldom talk about colonial knowledge in Malaysia. We always talk about colonization, which is a narrative about colonization. Colonial knowledge is a substance that actually create the society, history, and territory of this country. So that we don't talk very much. So this is where I end up with one all the time, learning from him because he is going around in Sarawak, in Brunei, and he's often invited to Indonesia, to Thailand. So we always engage and find out, how do the Thai keep Thai studies? How do Indonesians keep their Indonesian studies? What were their input? Is it Cornell input? Is it ANU input? Is it Monash input? Or is it really our input? So that's why when we established the Southeast Asian Studies program funded by Toyota Foundation, so Wan and Sharil were two important persons that were involved in the original operation of Southeast Asian Studies for Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamsul. It depends on how we dissect. We try to characterize someone, and of course, there's one incredible version of him. But we can look at it also differently. If you look at the two first sons, you can already see a distinct difference between the first and the second. The orientation one was, I mean, better use the Zawawi here, carried then. Rendra, more of the modern type, at the time more outgoing Zawawi was, as compared to Hameer, becoming much more Muslim and so on. But again, that's an important point you have to address though. Zawawi never gave the impression that he was never a color-driven guy. He was always colorblind in relation to treating people. I didn't see any element of that to become a Malay in the way he thought or to become somebody else in his thought. Everybody was the same. The second one is either he wrote a song, or that he sang a song, or he wrote something. You can always see that he's always looking at some sort of action to transform the golongan marhain. Yet he didn't like usage of such terms though, because he also felt, and I agree with him, these are elitist terms. How many Malay fellows will actually understand the kind of, and especially Bahasa Melayu, I was also disrupting or orating in Malay. The more bombastic words you use, the more excited people become. I don't know whether they understand them though. So one was against those, I mean, Zawawi was against all that. Let's now pass.
Yeah.
It is both an immense honor and a privilege to reflect on the life and work of Zawawi Ibrahim. My journey with Wan, as I always addressed him and will here today, began when he returned to Universiti Malaya as Professor of Anthropology in 2008. Although I had known him as a colleague of my husband's, Terence, in the Faculty of Economics and Administration, as it was then called, which he had served from 1984 to 1998. It was through our short time together at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and in the years following his departure from to take up other roles in other universities, that I came to truly appreciate Wan, both him personally and his scholarship. We collaborated on a few projects, and I also had the privilege of attending his inaugural lecture in October 2009, titled The Anthropology of the Malay Peasantry, reflecting on colonial and indigenous scholarship. The lecture, attended by Malaysia's leading academic and arts communities, was a testament to his profound impact on both fields and the esteem in which he was held. I have always considered Wan a mentor, based on his warmth, eloquence, and capacity for contemplative thinking. These are individual professional qualities that have become all too rare in today's academic environment. One that increasingly prioritizes numerical indicators over the deeper, more reflective aspects of scholarly life. In a system that values quantitative publication metrics, such as citation counts, H-index, impact factor, and other bibliometric indicators over genuine intellectual engagement, Wan stood for the kind of work that doesn't always show up in the metrics. Mentoring, community engagement, teaching, and interdisciplinary collaboration. These are vital components of a rich academic life that are seldom reflected in citation tallies. The narrow lens of these quantitative measures did not capture the value of his scholarship. And this, I believe, was one of the key reasons that he left Universiti Malaya. Now, the rubric for this forum describes Wan as a distinguished figure in anthropology, labor studies, indigenous studies, and Malaysian studies. it notably omits cultural studies. One possible rationale for this omission is that this forum seeks to emphasize one's lasting impact in these specific fields where his contributions have been most prominent or widely acknowledged. This might explain why cultural studies is not highlighted as a primary area of recognition for one. And even if his contributions to cultural studies were acknowledged, conventional understandings and perspectives would likely restrict his work on his impact to his work on music, film, and other popular cultural productions. So my goal in today's forum, as well as in the chapter for the proposed book project, where I will be able to elaborate on the points that I'm presenting today, is to critically examine one's contributions to Malaysian cultural studies in several significant ways. Now, anthropologists are not typically recognized as cultural studies scholars, given the distinct intellectual foundations, objectives, and methodologies that differentiate the two fields. Yet, in 2009, during a scholarly discussion at Universiti Malaya, I had introduced one to the globally renowned cultural studies theorist, Ian Ang, as the grand old man of Malaysian cultural studies. I had said this with both affection and deep respect for one's contributions. And today's forum provides an invaluable opportunity to unpack the meaning behind this designation, both for you and for myself, by exploring one's profound influence as an anthropologist on Malaysian cultural studies. Now, to fully appreciate one's contributions to Malaysian cultural studies, it is essential to first examine the key disciplinary distinctions between anthropology and cultural studies. While anthropology and cultural studies share an interest in culture and society, their origins, focuses, and methodologies diverge significantly. Anthropology originated in the 19th century as the study of human societies, and as the comparative study of human societies, emphasizing fieldwork, ethnography, and cross-cultural studies, cross-cultural analysis to understand cultural practices, social structures, and human behavior in an empirical manner. In contrast, cultural studies emerged in the 1960s and 1970s, drawing from critical theory, Marxism, post-colonial thought, and cultural critique. It focuses on power dynamics, identity formation, and cultural representation through methods such as textual and discourse analysis. Theoretical frameworks further distinguish these fields. In the early 20th century, anthropologists were primarily concerned with studying traditional cultures, often of indigenous and non-Western societies, through a detached scientific lens. Anthropology traditionally adopts an empirically driven approach aimed at documenting cultural practices objectively. Cultural studies emerged as a response to such methodologies, incorporating a focus on the politics of representation, which can never be a neutral exercise. As Edward Said argued in Orientalism, no representation is neutral. It is eo ipso, implicated, intertwined, embedded, interwoven with a great many other things besides the truth, which is itself a representation. This highlights the impossibility of objectivity in cultural critique. Another distinction is that anthropology and cultural studies are housed in different institutional fields. And despite the institutional separation, anthropology within the social sciences and cultural studies within the humanities, the boundaries between these disciplines have increasingly blurred due to interdisciplinary scholarship. Now, the interdisciplinarity that I'm singling out about one scholarship is not the conventional or the standard idea of interdisciplinarity, which, for example, combines sociology with psychology, for example. One's interdisciplinarity had a more radical edge to it, involving a transformative approach that transcends institutional boundaries and traditional knowledge hierarchies. This is a point that I don't have time to get into in detail here, but which I will develop for my chapter for one's book. Now, while anthropology traditionally focuses on culture as a theoretical and analytical concept, cultural studies is primarily a movement for social change and political mobilization, using culture as a means to achieve social equality and recognition for marginalized groups, or what Prof. Rajah and Dr. Adil have called the vulnerable in society. These intersections between anthropology and cultural studies are made powerfully clear in one's 2008 book, edited volume, Representation, Identity, and Multiculturalism in Sarawak. One himself acknowledged his use of cultural studies methodologies in the introduction to this book. In fact, very few anthropologists have engaged as deeply in the discussions on Malaysian multiculturalism as one did. In fact, the title of the book refers to three concepts that are fundamental to cultural studies: representation, identity, multiculturalism. In my review of this book for the journal Cultural Anthropology, I emphasized how one's work initiated a two-way dialogue between anthropology and cultural studies, bringing this field into closer conversation. Now, reflecting on this now, 15 years later, I recognize this relationship not just as a dialogue, but as a productive tension between the two disciplines. That is to say, a dialogue would mean that the relationship between anthropology and cultural studies is merely one of exchange, where ideas or insights flow in both directions. A relationship of productive tension, however, acknowledges that the tension between these disciplines, their differing theoretical foundations, methodologies, and concerns can spark new insights and innovations in both fields. Now, one's work exemplifies how navigating and drawing from these tensions can lead to a more robust understanding of culture, enriching both disciplines. The point then is not just that one was a university professor who pursued activism or journalism or media commentary in his free time, but that such activism was actually at the root of his academic work. For anthropologists like one then, engaging with cultural studies expanded the theoretical boundaries of his own discipline, offering a view of culture not just as a set of customs and practices, but as a capacity for collective empowerment and cultural production. So in the chapter that I will write for the book, I will focus on his book, Representation, Identity, and Multiculturalism in Sarawak, and I will explore the productive tension and not just dialogue in one's scholarship, with a view to exploring how his work has enriched both the disciplines of anthropology and cultural studies. Now, this book is important for several reasons. I can't elaborate on these points, but I want to end by just saying this. The field of Malaysian studies is conventionally highly West-centered. Malaysian studies, even that conducted by Malaysianists based in Malaysia, is largely centered upon experiences and developments in West of Peninsular Malaysia. So the essays collected and edited by one as Representation, Identity, and Multiculturalism in Sarawak, which includes several contributions by Sarawak-born indigenous scholars alongside other Malaysian and international researchers, are significant, therefore, as a corrective to the prevailing West Malaysia-centeredness in Malaysian studies. But to me, what is more impressive and significant about the volume is that it does not merely add its Sarawak case studies as empirical data, as appendages to existing frameworks. Rather, one's Sarawak case studies actively challenge dominant imaginaries by contesting colonial knowledge production, recuperating indigenous epistemologies, and exposing the state's multiculturalist discourse as nothing more than racial governance. For example, in his own contribution, one turned the Penans not as objects of research, but as bearers of knowledge. That is to say, he did not merely document the material dispossession of the Penans. Neither did he just recover their knowledge systems about their land and ecology. He did something far more radical as an anthropologist. One mined the productive tensions between his discipline and cultural studies and transformed indigenous knowledge systems into subaltern epistemologies that served as counter narratives to cultural hegemony. I will have to close here, but not before urging us all to remember one's academic legacy, not just by the work he did, but also by the minds he inspired. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me mention that Zawawi was always close to me, including the reason why he left University of Malaya. He had no choice because of the fact that his publications weren't recognized the way an anthropologist should be recognized. So I told him all the time, I hope you're not looking for me agreeing to what. I think you should pursue your course. But importantly, he edited a book that I reviewed for a journal, Social Science and Globalizing World. He edited that book. He took the position of a philosopher, just like Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen makes the point that, unfortunately, unlike many other disciplines that were all born from philosophy, somehow economics, when it was born, its umbilical cord was cut off from philosophy. The elements of philosophy were no longer there, and that's something he brings across in that book that I reviewed. Please, Chandra, it's your turn now. Consistent, you guys cannot pigeonhole him.
Prof. Rajah, fellow panelists, friends, peace be with you. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers for this kind invitation. I accepted this invitation for one very important reason. I think scholars in this country who have contributed and who are no longer with us, they should be recognized. They should be eulogized. Their works should be part of that huge body of knowledge that every generation passes on to the next and the generations after. So this is, I think, a very worthwhile endeavor, and I congratulate the Asia-Europe Institute for undertaking this, though from what Rajah told me, Zawawi was not part of this institute. He visited you all, but he was never part of this institute. So it is remarkable that you all have decided to organize this, to host this. And this, I think, is a contribution in itself. I knew Zawawi as a colleague in USM between 1980 and 1984. It was the time when he was in USM. And we were good friends. We shared platforms, we shared perspectives. We interacted quite a bit, both formally and informally. And then he left USM and joined the University of Malaya from 84 to about, I think, 88. He was in the University of Malaya. Then, of course, he moved on to other places after that. He was an academic nomad, in the true sense of the word, moving from academic institution to another. And it was perhaps part of his attempt to give meaning to knowledge as a pursuit, and also to give meaning to his life, to his own search for the truth. Now, that's the first point I want to make about one in particular. I can empathize with this, is nomadic nature. It moved in, moved out. I'd done a bit of that, but in a different way. I was in the university in Penang, USM, until 1983 for something like 13 years. Then I left USM to help build up Aliran. And then I returned to USM in 1991. I was there for about 5 or 6 years, then joined University of Malaya. And then I lost my job, University of Malaya. So it's always a little bit of a problem accepting invitations linked to the University of Malaya, because this is the university which, well, in a sense, terminated my contract. But on the other hand, whenever I come back to the University of Malaya for functions like this, there is also a little bit of misplaced pride in coming back. You know why? Because I sued the University of Malaya. I lost my job. And I won. And I won the case. I was compensated by the party that lost. They offered me either a return to the university or monetary compensation, and I accepted the latter. I did not want to return to the university. So University of Malaya, that's been the relationship with the University of Malaya. But it has been fine. Every time I come back and they're good friends, interact with them and so on. So apart from that aspect of Zawawi that I can empathize with as an academic nomad, par excellence, perhaps the most outstanding in our history. There's another aspect which would be the substance of what I want to present this afternoon. Through his academic work and also his activism, Zawawi connected with people. Scholarship was not something which was confined to the classic ivory tower. His anthropology, and I'm a little hesitant to use this term, but because he was not an anthropologist in the way in which the term is sometimes understood. But Zawawi was undoubtedly a person who really felt for people and talked about them, studied them, researched them, but not as objects. He felt a lot for them. And you can see it in a book of his, which I've read a couple of times, The Malay Labourer, which was published by ISIS in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry? Or revised by, which I haven't seen. But the ISIS publication, which shows his empathy for the people. It's not just, as I said a while ago, an object of study, which is what sometimes scholars do. And that I think is one of the least noble aspects of scholarship, the way in which we use people as objects. But he was different. He felt, he cared for them, he wrote, he spoke about them, and his activism reflected this. It was not just in his engagement, his involvement in certain issues and so on. We were engaged in a couple of such issues when he was in Penang. But it was also in the way in which Zawawi conveyed this through his music. And of course, we were exposed to a bit of that now and then in some functions and programs we had in Penang. And I was very happy to learn that his children have carried on this tradition. I think that is a great tribute to any parent, that you're able to lived this sort of thing from the sort of person I knew. Zawawi would not have forced anyone to become a musician. But this is something which they must have imbibed, the children, from the environment. It's something they felt for, partly because of what he was as a person. He was a gentle person. He was a person who was soft-spoken. And I think it must have emerged in his interactions with his family, the significance of music for him, both as an academic tool, but also as something that reflected his commitment to society. And this is the point that I want to emphasize, if I may, that scholarship has to serve people. Knowledge has to serve people. The idea of ivory tower approach to knowledge is something that is a demeaning notion of knowledge, actually. It does not reflect what knowledge was in many of our societies, meaning by which non-Western societies. Why is it that the term intellectual, as it has come to be used, never really emerged in any of our non-Western cultures? Why is this so? It never emerged. You can't think of any non-Western culture, whether it's Confucian culture or Hindu culture or Islamic culture, where you have this notion of the intellectual. In that sense, what you have is a notion of the sage. The sage. The sage as a person that represents and conveys wisdom, but only because it serves people. The sage is always in relation to society. And that's how the great sages of Asia, starting with Confucius, one of the greatest sages, yes, how he was perceived. So the notion of a sage, I think, is very important. Of course, we can't all aspire to be sages. It's not something that you can proclaim to the world. It's what history bestows upon you. But at least all of us can try to be faithful to the real purpose of knowledge, the real purpose of ideas, to serve people, so that these ideas would benefit people and help better their lives. And since Zawawi had, again, for want of a better word, a progressive perspective on society, I could empathize with him. And this has also been something that I've been very concerned about, that we should serve knowledge and serve society in such a manner that the poorer, someone used the term vulnerable, segments of society would benefit. And we don't do that very often. And I want to sort of very quickly, in the last part of this presentation, refer to my own discipline, political science and Malaysian politics, taught for many years in Malaysian campuses. The first university to offer a course in Malaysian politics was actually University of Science Malaysia. But, and I say this with all humility, even though the person who recruited me to that university and who was actually the pioneer of Malaysian politics as a discipline, Professor K.J. Ratnam, is no longer around. I have the greatest respect for the late Professor Ratnam. But nonetheless, when I took over that course, as I think Johan, who is here in the audience, and others in political science from the old days may remember or may not remember, when I took over that course from K.J. Ratnam, the most important change I made was to change its orientation. You don't begin by talking about Malaysian politics by looking at the contemporary situation. It has a history, because Malaysia has got a history. And for me, you cannot talk about Malaysian politics without talking about the indigenous political system in our country. It has a whole history behind it. And it was a well-developed political system, well-developed in the two most important aspects of a developed political system. It had domestic jurisdiction, it had an international dimension, the Malay kingdoms. But this is never highlighted. So you begin by talking about elections, about political parties and so on, as if this is the beginning of Malaysian politics. Yes. I'm about to finish, Rajah, yeah. I do not want to sort of force the situation upon you because I don't think a student should stop his ex-teacher while he's making a speech, but never mind, but let me conclude very quickly by saying that, that's the change that has to take place. And I don't know whether it is continued in USM. I left USM a long time ago, but Malaysian politics has to begin with its roots. Same thing with the other disciplines. In the social sciences in particular, we are faced with this challenge. What are the roots of the subjects that we teach, the knowledge that we convey? And we should look at our own history, our own background, our own context. This is where the question of context and history become very important in the construction of knowledge and in the dissemination of knowledge. Without that, it becomes, in many ways, meaningless, right? And I'm sure Johan would agree with me that political science in particular, especially when you start talking about area studies in political science, it suffers from this problem. That you just transfer something from another experience. It's the same structure, the same substructures and so on, but you don't look at the reality in your own society, and very often you miss the important things that are happening within your own society. Let me conclude by saying that Zawawi made a difference as far as that was concerned. Because when he was with us, and in our informal discussions with students and so on, he always wanted this dimension to be emphasized. It didn't make him parochial in any way. He was not pursuing an East-West dichotomy. He was just trying to say, look, let's make it relevant. Let us make our knowledge something which people can understand, share, and disseminate. And this is what he wanted to do. And I think he did it well within his discipline and within his music, which I think is a great achievement. Because I think the arts, just like academic scholarship, will have to serve the larger purpose. And the larger purpose is the well-being of other human beings, of the people who share this earth with us. We are privileged in many ways, all of us, in academia and in other similar roles, but we have to make our lives worthwhile. And the only way to make it really worthwhile is to serve people in whatever way we can. We fail sometimes, we don't live up to our own standards, but we have nonetheless got to serve the larger good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandra. I think you basically mentioned what Tagore used to say, an intellectual is one who works for society. But coming back to that, I think Chandra raised the point that's important about him, the way I understood him. He was highly sensitive, emotional, and he demonstrated that by resistance. He wasn't promoted in USM. He left to Universiti Malaya. And remembering him, when he was teaching me, and at the same time when he was at UM, he hardly published. To me, he was a prolific person who hardly published because he demonstrated that through resistance. Just see how prolific he became when he went to UNIMAS. I went there because of him. He got the Zawawi Ismail to get me there for 2 years. I just went horizontally. I was also dean down there. Understanding him, you can understand the many, many things he produced, which he didn't at USM or UM. Now let's get to Jun, please. You have a mic there?
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jun-E, and I'm a policy researcher in Khazanah Research Institute, which does policy research and advocacy on what we call pressing issues of the nation, including issues ranging from cities, housing, social protection, climate change, food security, and I happen to be within the digital and tech policy team, and my research area is AI governance. So I'm actually really honored to be here today to share with you my memories of Prof. Wan and reflect on how he changed my life. And I'm not saying this lightly because he actually did. And so firstly, to start off, how do I know Prof. Wan? He was my thesis supervisor when I was doing my master in public policy in and we later co-authored a book titled Blogging and Democratization in Malaysia, a new civil society in the making, based on the thesis. So there are times when you look back in your life and you wonder if this or that had not happened, would my life look very different now? Such as if you had chosen a different major or if you had chosen to move countries. So this is what we consider as like turning points, right? And I think in my life, meeting Prof. Wan was one of these turning points. And so I'll give you the story. So some 15 years ago in my early 20s, I had just graduated from a bachelor's degree in information systems engineering, and I had somehow ended up pursuing master in public policy in Unlike my fellow students, I had no background at all in public administration, no background in public policy. I was not a civil servant, and I was just generally really surprised that I got admitted at all. It was really challenging to jump from one field to a completely different one. And I was feeling very much out of my depth and completely out of place. And I was also painfully shy, I might add. And that was where I met Prof. Wan. I forget what he was teaching, but I approached him for advice for my master's thesis on a topic that I was not into. I did not understand it. And my supervisor at that point was really intent on pushing me into this area that he was working on. And I was finding it really difficult to navigate and was getting increasingly anxious. So after a long chat, or maybe a few long chats, Prof. Wan very gently told me that he could support me to work on an area that I could identify with, relate to, but I would have to change my supervisors, which I ended up doing. And so I ended up studying the Malaysian blogosphere. And one thing led to another, and then I ended up publishing this book with him. So socio-political blogging and the blogosphere was very exciting at that point, around 2008, when the alternative media, so-called, was just starting to challenge the mainstream media, which was very tightly controlled at that point. Very much under the government's control. And at that point, anyone could start a blog, and with some effort and a lot of luck, they could amass the readership of thousands. And this was pre-social media, of course. Some of you are really young, probably don't remember that era. And there was just a lot of optimism in exercising and this democratizing power of the internet in allowing us to exercise our freedom of expression. So things have, of course, changed a lot by now. Our digital spaces have evolved since then. Instead of individual blog sites, we moved our communication into social media networks like Facebook and Twitter. And socio-political blogging had an impact on the 2008 general elections. But by 2013, it had become a social media election. And then beyond that, of course, 2022, by now, it was a TikTok election. So if we look at where we are now, relying on big tech platforms and the whims of American multi-billionaires, the scene has changed a lot. The internet has become a much darker place, and with fake news, online scams, cyberbullying, confronting us at every turn. The power of governments and mainstream media has been eroded massively, not to mention little individuals like you and I, who can only rely on these privately run digital infrastructure to communicate with each other. So I was flipping through this book kind of that we co-published and trying to think of things to say in the speech. And I realized that back in the day, we talked about responsible blogging with an emphasis on journalistic standards of upholding the truth. And it's interesting now that we're actually in some sort of post-truth reality or post-truth society, mediated by algorithmic curation and powered by generative AI, AI-generated content. So these concerns have morphed into much more complex issues beyond media freedom. So back then it was actually comparatively simpler, right? So, but the core issues have remained the same. I think that the principles of truth and integrity remain to be important, and we again see the concentration of power in few hands, vying to shape the way we look at the world and relate to each other. So Prof. Wan saw the potential of new media, and together we rode this very early wave, studying how the internet disrupts existing social order, but in a good way. And I only wish that we had the opportunity to discuss where we are now, to pick his brain on how he'd think about the AI era. How right now there's an overload of AI-generated content, the outsourcing of thinking and decision-making to AI systems, the general fervor in replacing humanity and humanness with machines. How do we consider AI mediation of our relationships with each other and the resulting individualization? And this is a disruption of the social order of a very different sort. So I would imagine the conversation with him to be very much about meaning, the meaning of art, the meaning of research, the meaning of life, and how we would protect the meaning together as a society. So back to how Prof. Wan changed my life. This book was a pretty big deal for me because it opened many doors. I'm pretty sure I got the PhD placement in NTU because of the book. And my current team leader in KRI also mentioned the first time when we met that she had read it for her research back in the day. And so it's also really important to remember the context. Prof. Wan could have easily brushed me off as a clueless, awkward computing student who was completely lost. But instead, he took me under his wing and honed my skills as a researcher, setting me up professionally towards the career path of a policy researcher. So he gave me the confidence and also the permission to belong. I remember the last time that I saw Prof. Wan. It was on a plane, maybe 2017, 2018, I'm not sure when. And our eyes met, and he gave me this really warm smile. And we could only exchange a few words because we were chatting at the aisle. But I remember feeling the sense of amazement that someone of his academic stature and coolness would address me as an equal. Because Prof. Wan is not only an academic, he was also doing things like pioneering the Rainforest Music Festival, World Music Festival, and he was just so cool, right? So I thank the Asia-Europe Institute for giving me this opportunity to reflect on Prof. Wan's presence in my life and in my research. And I want to emphasize that he played no small role in getting me to where I am now. And I'm sure that he has watered and tended to many other seedlings, which have now grown into trees near and far, nurturing the next generation of researchers, educators, leaders, musicians, you name it. So thank you for your attention, and I would like to hand the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you, Jun-E Tan. As I ready myself to open the floor for questions, I'd just like to make one point. I think it's very much the case now that my mentors, Chandra, Johan, and Mazda are there. Let me mention that in the circles that I was around, Zawawi was never called a Marxist. That was Karl Marx Minden, Hashim Yaqub. He took great pride being called Karl Marx Minden or Panglima Garang Bukit Minden. By the way, that's not Zawawi, so maybe we should not use that on him. He's more of the James Scott type of weapons of the weak, mild resistance. If he doesn't like something, doesn't follow that, that sort of person he was. Let me open the floor now for questions. In fact, when we were playing soccer, Zawawi used to call in, Kalmak, send the ball. Yeah, but not as accomplished as soccer. He was really a good soccer player. Questions, please. Adil, Dr. Adil, sila mulakan. Perhaps Gareth should start it. Who is reading himself? Datuk Adis, tak ada solat. Tan Sri Johor, macam mana pula ni? See, my buddies are, oh yes, Mazna is ready.
Okay, thank you all. Yeah, I'm Azna Muhammad, and I was also a colleague of one at USM. I think at this point, I felt that I need to come in after hearing all of you speak about him. Obviously, he was a man of many talents. And June, thank you very much, Izzy, for filling in that gap, because I think that is probably the best accolade that any academic can have, Izzy, that to see that, you know, someone that we have spurred someone on. And Dr. Chandra, you know, I really appreciated your speech, because, as you say, Izzy, this is about recognition, and it's very difficult to recognize academic talents. But more, of course, one was more than that. He was more than just an academic. So I think you really pinpointed, the emphasis of today's meeting, that this recognition, and how do we do this recognition? And I like the point where you said that, well, he was just doing the right thing. And the fact that he was an academic nomad says a lot about one's personality. He actually never became, he was actually never criticizing anyone in the establishment. I think that was quite remarkable of him. He would just leave. And you know, find something else to do, find something better to do, work with people who are better to work with. And I think that's a lot of, that's the exceptionalism in one, I think. Because as I've only been to 2 academic places, and you know, with a lot of angst, you see, in between. So all of us have carried this, you see, very, I mean, we don't leave a place nicely most of the time. We always have something against a place. But I think one was remarkable. He would just take every place, make the best of what he could in every place, and he shone, you know, in each of these different academic institutions. So I am supposed to write a chapter, but after listening to all of you, I think I know what angle to take now. I think he was an academic, but I think his finest emotional expressions are found in his lyrics and his songs. I think that's how I would craft, you see, my own tribute of one. I mean, it really means nothing, you know, anthropologists, political scientists, say what you want, but what are you as a person? And I think what he is as a person is his very remarkable humanity, full of expression. And even though he was a brilliant scholar, but he found an avenue to express himself through his songs and his lyrics. So thank you, AEI, for organizing this. I'm very appreciative that we're able to remember, you know, one this way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in similar way, in the chapter that Adil and me have written, we recognize P. Ramlee, for example, as a great champion of society. He demonstrated by contesting, questioning both leaderships that we have, both the government in power and royalty. In fact, after getting through Zawawi all the while, I got back to listening and hearing his movie. I think he was a fantastic man. He was always standing for society, P. Ramlee. More questions? Yes, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank Gareth for inviting me, because anthropology is not exactly my area of knowledge of anything, but I just wanted to ask, throw a question to any one of the panel members that I've read some of his writing and it's been very interesting. My question would be, was he a man that had any political leanings? Was he somebody that avoided it, or has he been ever colored or is his mind distorted by any leanings towards politics? I just wondered, because a man with so many talents, I must have felt that because I didn't know him in an area that I don't know his history, was there anything that persuaded him politically in his life? Yeah.
I try to answer this. I worked with him for 5 years. He worked with me as a research fellow. So one of the most important things that he always remind me is that not to take sides in politics. Because in Malaysia, today you are pro-government, tomorrow you are opposition, and tomorrow the opposition is government. So I said to him, how do you do this? Because you can hold your own position, but you still can shift. If you don't shift, people shift you by using your writing. So it's quite interesting debate, because one of the things that I remember asking him, why don't you write column one? Why don't you become a columnist? Because columnist, somehow, because I spent about 20 years being a columnist, so I get bombarded from all sides for my comments, because this month is about Look East policy, but karaoke came first, I said, something like that. So it's interesting how you write column, you invite, not so much you on one side or the other side, but provide a criticism or critique that can invite politicians and others who have some leaning somewhere. So one doesn't have that, because I believe if he were to write columns, then it would be different. Then he will be, but then he keep on writing songs, and politicians don't listen to these songs if they are not beautiful enough, like Siti Nurhaliza. So I think this is where his music is his political platform, if you want to use the word politics there. Mencari America is a classic song for me, where he's talking about, Vietnam days and all this stuff inside that lyric. So, and about Starbucks, about all sorts of things that we go through in our life, which we now call consumerism. And I think he is, I don't want to say he's a politics for the green, but I can say that he is a politician of the alternative kind, He believes in, why don't we look at this way? Why don't we try and see this way? So, you have time, you buy his album, you would know all the things he has commented about this country. Orang asli, the poor, the plantation workers. But we can't call him Marxist, and you can then relate him to Communist Party. So it's quite interesting how shallow our discussion on politics in Malaysia has been. So it's so easy for us to label and whatnot. Yeah, I think that's basically what I did for 5 years.
Just to mention that he doesn't take the position of John Beatty on a study of other cultures as being anthropology. He's far more extensive the way I understood him.
Yes, that was a very good question, actually, because in my conversations with him, I don't remember us speaking about party politics, really, but he was a critique of the state. So there's a distinction there, I think. I think in all his works, he is critiquing the state's developmentalist narratives, multicultural discourse. But about party politics, no, we never spoke about that.
He discussed, shared passionately with me was after the 2018 elections. He was very hopeful we will transform for the good, so that Malaysia becomes one nation. He was more interested in that than speaking about economic progress as such. Then I think by 2019, he was already disappointed. And then, of course, 2020, he wasn't going out because his health reasons, COVID and things like that. If I had to see him, I had to go to his house. In other words, we all agree that he was not actively involved in politics, and he did not really support any political party, the way I understood him. Question. Ini dah takut sebab bos lama sini. Who was it? Any questions, please? Intellectuals of Johan are silent. That's here. You might stir them up.
Yeah. Thank you, Rajah. Since my name has been invoked a couple of times, Chandra and you, of course, I knew one, and that it was from my USM days, and he was an exceptional individual. I think what we didn't mention, we know his many talents, his scholarships, his brilliance there, and so on. But what we didn't mention was his friendship. He was really a very good friend. That's one Zawawi. You get to know one, and he becomes very deeply involved in what you do, and vice versa. So you cannot run away from one. One will be with you for a long time, and he remains in my heart for a very long time. So let me end with that.
Thank you. I should mention this name too, because both Zawawi and Kamal always, at that time at least, although the views may have changed, they were fond of both Idris Jala and me. Idris Jala, the Pemandu Minister. In fact, I was thinking of inviting him, I just remembered. But of course, he's no longer in the quest for reforms, and so on. He's more busy in the corporate world. But we should bring him for Kamal's. I'll call him because he remains my close friend. Any others with questions? That one I didn't. Oh, we have a new account of Zawawi. He was a fantastic cook.
You ask his wife. Yeah, Nosha up there. Yeah, up there. He used to cook endlessly. All the guests. Yeah.
Maybe I can just mencela here. Maybe we could get a bit more of a dialogue between the speakers on the floor, because we've got some very fresh perspectives from Jun-E. Thank you so much on the work on digital, on the implications of the blogosphere and now social media, and how it's become a very dark place, and how one was very much involved in that. But we also have some amazing sharings from Prof. Shamani and Prof. Shamsul on how he engaged with the tensions of cultural studies and anthropology. I'm wondering if we could just be musicians about this and riff a bit and improvise your thoughts on how would a study on the state of humanity today, in the context of the digital challenges and landscape that we have, like how would Professor Wan Zawawi approach a study on what we're going through today from your perspective, kind of merging these perspectives, the digital sphere, anthropology, cultural studies in all its tensions, right? And of course, with activism as well, Dr. Chandra, and maybe with a little bit of economics, Prof. So I'm wondering if we can take advantage of the wonderful panel that we have today to get a few insights on what would a study by Zawawi Ibrahim look like now, considering the current trials and tribulations and tensions that we have in the world today. Thank you.
You might want to start with edited book, Social Sciences and Knowledge in a Globalizing World. You might look, but anyway, yeah. Please, the panel.
You have reviewed the book.
Yes, that was the book actually. Yes, I had a chapter in that book, and there were several people who had actually reviewed it. One of them was Prof. Rajah, but it was also reviewed by Eric Thompson, an anthropologist from NUS, and he said, and he made his comment was, academics should stop calling for non-Western, should stop asking for indigenous, non-Western based scholarship and actually try producing it, he said. Stop calling for it, start producing it. And he felt that actually one did that in that book, especially his chapter. I think it was written with Norsha. He had a chapter in that book. And again, he was actually not just asking for the, let us not look at the West. He was actually looking at subaltern perspectives. So how would actually, Adil, it's unfair of you to throw out that question. It's a huge challenge. I think one would also have some problem navigating this because we have, it is, I think perhaps a chapter in its own right. Is anybody up? Maybe you.
I agree with what has been said just now, that it's a situation that is in flux. And I don't think scholars, or even scholars or activists, would want to take a position, a rigid position at a time like this. There are many things which are evolving. For instance, you take just one small, and I underline this word, a small dimension of this situation in flux, someone called Trump. It's very difficult to analyze him. He's full of contradictions, and the contradictions may be deliberate, but on the other hand, they may be part of a larger scenario, why there are those contradictions. We really don't know. There are people who I know in the United States who are convinced that Trump's maneuvers are actually an attempt to undermine the empire, which is very hard to believe, given the positions it takes on various issues and so on. But this is what he's trying to do. But if you look at some of the end results of his pronouncements and actions and so on, they're actually going to undermine the empire. No one would have contributed more to the decline and demise, perhaps, of the empire as an individual, in terms of individual contributions, than someone like Trump. Yeah? He has created the sort of mass aversion towards the United States through many of his actions. So perhaps this is part of it. We don't know. So I think this is a difficult situation. It needs time. We have to see how it evolves. And I suppose Zawawi would have taken a similar position. He would have waited for things to evolve because he was, all said and done, he was not a political person. He was not a political person. He would have wanted to see how these things evolved and then perhaps bring in his humanistic perspective at the end of the day.
Yes, I forgot to mention that Prof. Johan also reviewed that book. Thank you so much for having reviewed it favorably, actually.
Jun?
So I've not read the book, and I can only sort of imagine a conversation with Prof. Wan on some of the considerations that I have on the current state of culture in an era of AI. And what I would love to really ask him what he thinks, imagining, how he would respond, giving his deep involvement in music and art in that sense. What he thinks about AI slop. Just AI slop basically means an overload of low quality AI generated content. And this has infiltrated, books, music, videos, YouTube, you name it, right? Because it's so easy to generate content with AI. So I would love to really chat with him and wonder what he thinks about the situation of conflating form and meaning, right? Because AI is very good at imitating form, syntax. If you ask it, speak to me in Shakespeare, and it will, right? Say this to me, and it will. But that doesn't mean that it understands the meaning. And so where does this bring our humanness? Where does this bring authenticity? how do we, how can we keep being authentic in this era? And is it even that important? You know, so I don't know. There's a lot of different things that I would have loved to talk to him about on how AI is changing our culture, and this information overload means that we might no longer be able to find each other in our words and even our song. So that's my little musing when it comes to what would Prof. Wan say on that.
What I would force one to do, as a question, yeah, not so much what he wants to do, because he's open to all sorts of ideas and he has sort of developed from the question we ask him. Can you explain to me one, how we move from ethnography to netography? How? What have you gone through? What are your students now PhDs based on AI? I said, so what do you do? And how would you train yourself to make sure you can know that this is the cheap scale AI versus the most expensive one, the app, I said, you know. So all these things you have to be very clear now. You are a supervisor doing PhDs with many candidates. They all come. The candidate is not only from Malaysia, from China, Middle East, Indonesia. So they are all AI savvy. So I'm trying to suggest one, why don't we run a training for the supervisors to detect this AI so that anthropology wouldn't be cheapened, I said, you know. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that he would discuss and find out in detail, how do we do this? So then he will start asking probably Jun to come and everybody else to come. What do you think of this? You know? And he edit another book. That's what we want to do. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I can see him still very concerned about peasantry. You must know his speech in 2009 and also his paper in 2021. How he moved from anthropology of the Malay peasantry to anthropology of memory. See, it's interesting. So he's moving from the fieldwork that he has to a fieldwork of his family. You see, it's interesting if you see how, if you read and go through sociological imagination by the American author, I can't remember his name now, but he proposes to us, we must look at the biography of the individual, because in the end, these are the people ask, they send their questionnaire and all this are the biography, the individual, family, and community. So to what extent, I think one would be interested and attracted to this idea that to what extent the biography of the society is based on memory, or is based on written, or based on written but consumed and rehashed in memory. So it's quite interesting the way he wrote for the last paper about the fieldwork. Yeah. So for me, he was really looking into the mystery of the family as the unit that inform us about life, the anthropology of the family. That's basically what he was interested in. So I would like him to continue to do that.
We have time only for one more question, because at 4:40 I have to pass the cue back to the chair out there, MC out there, who would then have the next session, which will be music display by his two sons, Rendra and of course Hameer, who's here. Hameer here. If we don't have any questions, we can start the next session earlier. But then someone said something. Oh, somebody out there. Oh,
Hi, yes.
Your son.
Daud from Aalto University, Finland. I have a question about the intellectual seeds that were planted during his Monash days. Maybe someone can expand on that. Thank you.
Intellectual seeds that were planted
in Monash days. Who else were with him? Me. Yeah. Yeah. Well, in Monash, I joined him when he has finished his PhD, and I was beginning mine, starting my own in 79. He finished in 78. He wrote this massive thesis. The external examiner was James Scott. James Scott said, I got hernia carrying your thesis. So it was quite interesting. He was a member of a number of study group in Melbourne. Yeah. So this study group, from reading Capital, to some other literary studies. So, and I did not see him moving a lot with the Malaysian community. He was moving a lot with Australian communities, the Greek, the Italian, and so on. Perhaps because he likes the food, and he's also a good cook. So I think in some ways, what we can say about his ability is intellectual ability is very much inputted through the exercise of interaction he has with the different multicultural societies in Melbourne, and music in Melbourne. So whenever there's a big concert by James Taylor and all this, he will be there. Even how many 100 ringgit or he will go. So he keeps, I think, at least 2 or 3 years there are big concerts in Melbourne or in Sydney, he will be there. So you have to see the eventual development of creativity and anthropology. Creativity here is music, anthropology is already developed in Australia. And I think he was there 14 years, if I'm not mistaken. 14 years in Melbourne. And he flew from airport in Kelantan to Subang and then to Melbourne. Never was in KL. So he didn't know KL. I never been to KL, he said. So I've been to Subang airport, direct to Melbourne, and never came back. Balik lah. Sekali-sekali, once a while, he will be back. But otherwise, he's in Melbourne for 14 years. So 14 years is the longest time he stayed in one place in a university. In the 9 places he worked, in Melbourne was the longest. But also not only in Monash, but also he was communicating with people from Latrobe, from Melbourne Uni, and also, what is the other one? Yes, Latrobe, yeah. So it's quite interesting. Joel Khan after him. Yeah. Joel Khan came very much after to replace Michael Swift. So I think we forgot that 14 years he spent in Australia. I think that's a good question you asked. The 14 years is the formative years of his thinking, of his activities, of his research, and many other things which I shall remain silent about.
Okay, I think it's about time, though we have 2 more minutes. I don't think we can do much out of it. I shall pass the cue back to the MC.
Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for the insightful discussion. We would like to invite Professor Rajah to give tokens of appreciation to our panelists. May I invite Distinguished Professor Shamsul Amri Baharuddin? Professor Sharmani Patricia Gabriel? Dr. Jun-E Tan? and Dr. Chandra Muzaffar. Thank you once again to Professor Rajah. We kindly invite you to return to your seats as we prepare for the next segment. Now, we would like to invite Mr. Rendra Zawawi and Mr. Hameer Zawawi to the stage to give a few words about their father and also give a musical performance. Please welcome Mr. Rendra and Hameer Zawawi.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'll use this. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be in this hall to see a lot of family members. Uncle Shamsul, I haven't seen you for like in ages, more than like 15 years, I suppose. Thanks for being here. I'm sure my dad would have loved to see this whole thing unfold beyond him, to see how he's celebrated as the person that he was, honoring his lifetime's work as an academic. I'd like to show my appreciation as well to the Asia Europe Institute for helping organize this event today. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't sure how I was going to approach this little mini speech. It was supposed to be a performance, but I kind of took it upon myself to leave the musicality to my younger brother, while I just sort of like riff off, saying a few things on stage, which I'm not exactly sure what's going to unfold. But, you know, it's really interesting witnessing all the panels talking about who my dad was and his version of him. And after hearing all that, it sort of informed me of a lot about myself as well. Now, I've been a digital nomad for the past few years, and now I know why. It's in my freaking DNA. You know, and a lot of other things as well. It was an interesting discovery. How many of you in here actually have met my dad in person? Raise of hands. Who are here who knows him by name or by work? Okay. I appreciate all of you coming here today. So before he was an academic or before he was a musician, he was a father to all of us. A lot of you know his works and academic with all his books, which to me was a harder read than Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, or maybe that's just me myself. Like really hard words that he uses in. I'm like, why? And some of you may know him as the poet musician, where he would just tell you, oh, I'm going to play the song, like this is the other chords. All right, when are we performing? We're performing in 5 minutes, and then he's like, you got to go on stage. And he would usually have like 8 to 10 people coming on stage playing with him. That was the sort of person he was. So for us, he was a father first. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the man himself as a father figure, as a husband to my mom, as well as the main, the breadwinner, the household of the family. In a nutshell, as a father, he was very, very unconventional compared to a lot of normal people's dad. And I think, Gareth, you mentioned this first of all. It was actually my first point. He had this very weird sense of dressing. If everybody knows him, he would have this beret on, his scarves, and random places where the climate does not dictate it. I was really, as a kid, he would come over to the schools and for students' teachers report, and I'd be like hiding in a corner. Why is my dad dressed up like a superhero with a cape? It was often one of those things that I would remember him for. And he used to dress us up when we were kids. We'd be like wearing things. I'd be going thinking it's a normal thing. And then my friends would be like, isolating us in one corner. We'd be wondering why. I've sort of grown out of it, as you can see over here. But sometimes I do take his fashion sense. Speaking about AI a while ago, I can tell you one thing. He would have a very difficult grasp on the issue itself because in general, Dad was very, very hopeless in tech. And it's overcompensated by my brother over here, who is like a genius in tech. For the longest of time, when the computer came out, he would be calling the mouse the monkey. He'd be like, Hameer, why is the monkey not working? It took him a few months to get to switch the terminologies to mouse. And that was the sort of person he was. He was very quirky with all the tech stuff. And then I think somebody mentioned that Dad was also a great cook. He's a great chef, And one of the things that, he was very experimental in his food. That's the problem. That is the problem. He was very experimental, like his songs, he likes to craft them up, with his food as well. And guess who were his first guinea pigs? Us. Sometimes pukul 10 malam, we tengah nak tidur, and my dad would just go to the kitchen and start cooking things up, It's masak. And I mean, it's not a good idea to eat before you sleep, but there was never there was sort of never that awareness. We grew up with food right before we sleep. Come up and hey, try this, and
that's because he never sleeps, bro. He just stays up.
That's true. He's a late night sleeper. So for him, that was sort of like lunch or dinner or something. Not exactly sure, but one thing we could tell you was that we had to say good stuff about his food. If we we like, it's okay, and he'll sulk the next day, and that sort of spoke of his persona as a very sensitive soul. He had this soul where he was a delicate man and he was a people's person, and that's how he connected to the people in his line of field, in his line of work, whether it be academic or music itself. I had this one more point to share out about corporal punishment that I endured when I was a kid, but I'm going to leave that out. He was a big fan of Shubit Buntut lah. But that got eradicated quickly after my mom had a conversation with him. But beyond all those quirks, my dad was a highly principled man. He had values that he instilled in us, and he had great passion for the work that he did, that we took it from him as well. As long as I can remember, we were raised with 3 main rules. I don't know if this applied to my younger siblings, but when I was growing up, there was 3 main rules that we had to adhere to. Number 1, no smoking. Number 2, no riding motorbikes.
Oh, yeah. No motorbikes.
And number 3, which is the most important for me, at least, was we will not pay for your tertiary education. That means we had to get our own scholarship. He made that very clear as we were growing up, that your tertiary education was your own responsibility. And that was sort of the thing that drove us into achieving academic success in our line of fields. So that was the sort of person he was, you know. And the other thing that he also instilled in us, and I think my brother maybe could expand this later on, was having an innate sense of social capital.
I just wrote that down in my notes.
You wrote that?
I just wrote that.
He was a big, you know, if you meet my dad, he was a charismatic person. He's very charming, and he would know how to engage in people. And it was all about having social capital to expand your network, to expand your social circles, to use that as a drive to succeed in life and to sort of like explore that beyond. So that's one thing that we all grew up with. He was also a very, very generous person in a lot of ways. One of the families, or one thing that we grew up with is never fight over food. And I think that was something inherited in his upbringing during his, when he was in Terengganu, I think. But apart from that, it was all this generosity. And I'll just relate you one story that when he passed away, I was in LA working. And I got the message, and immediately I booked a flight back to Malaysia, to KL. And I remember the flight that took me about 22 hours to get back to KL, where it was one of the toughest flight ever. I remembered just taking my phone and, you know, purchasing the internet for the whole entire flight. The thing that helped me got through into the flight was all these messages that were flooding my phone by people that I know and people that I didn't know, who knew my dad. And these were messages of them telling me about how my dad's work has influenced their life, has changed their life in many, many different ways. His books and his thesis, his songs, and they've personally like helped them got over through life or a certain situation. And there were other messages in cases as well where, you know, they were saying, hey, your dad was doing this, paying tuition of some sort for certain things. And he was always the man that was helping people all around without asking for anything in return. And he never shouted about it. So it spoke a lot of impact about what he did as a person. And, you know, it was very, very touching knowing that he did this out of sincerity and generosity and never asking for fame or anything back in return. But the biggest value of all, which is we're going to get to the next segment, to us personally, was his big involvement in the music sector. He, I think, as explained a lot by the panels on stage, he was a big proponent in using his music to express a lot of his thinking and a lot of the things that he can't express in columns or maybe, in things. And we grew up with that surrounding. We grew up with the likes of all his celebrity friends, Gareth Ibrahim, Dr. Rami Sarip, M. Naseh, and it was a big part of our lives. Music was the love language of the Zawawi family. One of the biggest moments or memories that we have would just be all of us sitting in the living room, jamming music together. And that was sort of how we relate to each other. And there were times where, and inevitably, all three of us, me, Hameer, my sister, and my elder half-brother as well in Australia, he's also into music. And all of us have this music part of us that we wanted to show our dad. And we all became musicians in our own rights. And it was so amazing that after we composed a song or something, we would come up to dad and we'd play it in front of him. We would be asking for his approval, for his validation. It was something that we looked forward to. And then came to a point where he was really proud of us. And it came a point where when people visited the house, he would guilt force us to perform in front of their friends. And I used to totally hate it. Like, what is this child abuse? But thanks to that, it got us a lot out of our shells and into the performing arts. And his love for music was very apparent over there. But even though he loved music, he also valued education at the same time. You see, a lot of us wanted to be musicians when we grew up, but my dad said, nope, get your basic degree first, and then you can do music, because just in case it fails, you have something to fall back onto. So you can see him approaching things in a very wholesome and a very authentic way, that it was just not one or the other. It's a very wholesome combination, and he's managed to instill that in all of us. So because of that, I got my civil engineering degree, Hameer got his computer programming degree, and then all of us branched out into music one way or another.
Except for Kaisha, though, the younger
Kaisha was like, when she grew up, she looked at both of us. Oh, you guys did music at the end? I'm just going to skip that whole part and just go straight to music. She was a bit much cleverer. So, just to end this little mini speech, this was a sort of unique, eccentric person, my dad was, but full of love, compassion, and understanding. He never forced us to do anything. He always allowed us to explore our own freedom and come to the conclusion, come to our decision making, and then he was always a big fan of reflections and to see what you've done and where you're gonna go later. As a testament to his side of music, I've called my my older brother, my younger brother, who has been the MVP of the family. He's been taking care of dad when he was sick, coming back from Brunei, and he sort of like paused his life going around the world to come back and really, really take care of dad, sending him to dialysis and all that. I have lost a father and a prominent figure in my life, but Hameer lost a father and a best friend, because that was what dad was to Hameer before he passed away. He was very proud of us, and this one thing that I couldn't say to him while he was still alive was I was very proud of him as well. I hope he can hear this. And to celebrate his side of music, I think Hameer would start off by performing some of his songs that meant a lot to him and meant a lot to us as well. So thank you guys, and I hope you guys enjoy the next segment of the performance.
Faces in the sun, a time I can recall, will take me back to a time when we were young, to where some things begun. So touch me with a gentle warmth. So come to the shore, play in the sun, watching the boats sailing away. And I'll take you down to see the boats flying away into the sky. Drops of morning rain, so soft against your skin, will take me back to a place we left behind, to where our search has begun, and took us to the shore. Come to the shore, play in the sun, watching the boats sailing away. And I'll take you down to see the birds flying away into the sky. That was a song that Dad composed for his first son, Johan, who's now based in Sydney, Australia. Maybe not a well-known fact, but if you don't know now, you know, Dad used to have a life back in Australia before he came to Malaysia. And 14 years. I thought it was longer. I thought it was about 20 years. But as Rendra mentioned, I was back here with Dad, heard all his Australian stories, you know, cool stuff, uncool stuff. But some things I cannot mention here. I'm so glad. I remember having a conversation once with Dad, like, hey, dude, like, should I become a social scientist as well? Should I study anthropology? And he's like, no, man. We only need just one anthropologist in the family. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for saying that, because I totally cannot understand whatever you write. You know, sometimes all the big words that you use, social capital was one of it. To me, like, you know, that's already so big. And like, I jokingly said, I was like, I think I may need a lecture to be able to understand what you did, you know. And lo and behold, this is the lecture today. And Dad, Mom as well, you know, raised us all kids as friends. We never really had a parent-child barrier, and I think that shows in how we bring ourselves today. We would discuss ideas, throw ideas amongst each other. As Jun-E mentioned about the AI things, you know, Dad was totally no-go with technology, right? And I would be his right-hand man with tech. You know, I'll explain to him like, dude, you know, all these things you see on YouTube, all these things you see on Facebook, you know, it's all generated, it's all, he was in the midst of grasping things, but he would always refer back to me, and yeah, I would be that guy who kind of makes him discover what's new in this world, especially with the tech stuff. Man of many talents, cooking. Thanks, Uncle Shamsul, for bringing that up. I was gonna ask a question like, you know, was Dad's cooking, did he ever bring, was it part of his bringing together of people and discussing ideas, anthropology related, you know, was food one of it? I know music was one of it, you know. Every time after a show, after a gig, you know, we would go mama, and then after mama, that's not the end, come over to the house, come guys, let's jam. And music was one of it, and I'm sure cooking too, at some point. And one of his other talents that not many people know about, because I just, again, you know, he's my friend. I just call him dude, and then like, you know, call him all sorts of names. He too to me. But one hidden talent he really had, which I riff off and learn about, like pick it up a lot, is lame jokes. Really, really lame jokes. Like, roti nan apa? bila you order, tak tahu perisa dia. Roti, none of your business. That's so lame. Roti nan apa? Pembuat roti nan tu tak pandai buat benda lain, tapi roti nan je dia pandai buat. Paling pandai dia buat roti nan je. Nama dia siapa? Nama dia Jack lah. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Forgot to mention the comedy show as well. Yeah?
And I remembered vividly, few weeks before he passed away, sending him over to the dialysis center. Yeah. And I thought that was a bit of a sign. He asked me like, "Hey, Hameer, if you were to ever be reborn, what era would you like to be reborn in?" I'm like, interesting question. Maybe the medieval times. I don't know, because I don't agree with what's happening with tech nowadays. And he's like, and I asked him back, "Oh, all right. So what about you, Dad?" "I'd like to be reborn in the era of the Beatles." And I think that kind of encapsulates Dad's true nature, that era, and basically the whole music movement and whatnot. Talking about some, just to riff off a bit slightly as well, Dad's music was always trying to bring an idea, instill an idea, mostly about social justice and stuff. But I love the fact that he also included people that mattered within those communities. For example, like his album Dayung, he had an Orang Asli singer. I'm totally not familiar from which tribe she's from, Mak Mina. And very interesting as well, when I was thinking about this a few days ago, just yesterday I met terserempak with Rafiq Rashid, who had a band with an Orang Asli singer named Mak Mina, which was the same lady who then sung in Dad's album Dayung. And aside from that, also in the Dayung album, Dad has a blues song sung in Kelantanese dialect. Although Dad's from Terengganu, he can speak Kelantanese because he went to Form 6 in SIC, Kelantan, Sultan Ismail College. And, perhaps one of the jokes he would have made was probably, "Oh, cool, you can make music with AI. I would make all my songs in Kelantanese, perhaps, with AI." And that's, the scary part is it's actually possible. As funny as it is. So Dad had a life in Australia, came back to Malaysia, started writing songs for a lot of famous musicians. Not sure how that happened, but there's a very interesting magazine up there on the table. So if you guys don't know, there's a table up there, Dad's personal collections of all his books. It's not for sale, it's just for display. But there's one magazine with his face right in front. It's called Men's Review from 1995. And in that particular article of that magazine, which I should scan and maybe put online, he explains how his journey back from Australia led him to composing music. And one of his most popular songs, which Ren would call his swan song, was composed. So the song I sang just now was composed for his first son, Johan. And the swan song that he wrote for, which eventually got picked up by Ramli Sarip and became one of the top hit songs in Malaysia, whatchamacallit, was written for my Perjalanan Hidup. Thank you, Uncle. Was written for my older sister, who unfortunately passed away the day she was born due to a heart complication. If she was still alive today, she would be about 2 years older than me and 3 years younger than Ren. And yeah, we're gonna perform this song, attempt to perform. Gonna bring Rendra back up on stage, Ren. Come. So, Dad's top songs, Dad's top books up there on the on the table. Aku yang masih di perjalanan hidup ini. Begitu lama berlegar di persimpangan dunia. Menempuh jarak dan titian, rimba dan lautan, mencari sesuatu yang abadi.
Aku yang masih di perhentian hidup ini, begitu jauh mengembara ke serata dunia, mengejar siang dan malam, surut dan pasang, mencari sesuatu kebebasan, mencari sesuatu kedamaian. Di mana berakhirnya perjalananku ini? Esok dan lusa bukan milikku, oh Tuhanku. Lindungilah hamba-Mu yang hina ini. Aku setia hanya padamu, oh Tuhanku. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, oh, oh. Di mana berakhirnya perjalananku ini? Esok dan lusa bukan milikku, oh Tuhanku. Lindungilah hamba-Mu yang hina ini. Aku setia hanya padamu, oh Tuhanku. Aku setia hanya padamu. Aku setia hanya padamu.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys very much. Dad will always boast that he wrote this song within 5 minutes at our backyard. So yeah, I'm just gonna boast it for him.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rendra and Mr. Hameer, for that lovely performance. We would once again like to invite Mr. Gareth Richards for his remarks.
So this time it's really me. I'm not Victor Terence King. It's really, really me. So I really do want to thank especially Nosha and Rendra and Hameer in particular, and the absent Kaisha. I've known them for what seems like my whole life. And today is an interesting culmination of the past, but also a stepping stone to the future. I'd like to thank Rajah very much for inviting me, and in particular to Adil for pulling all the strings, and also indeed to the whole of the Asia Europe Institute team. Done a marvelous job. I was a bit apprehensive about coming back into this space today after 20 years, but I see I'm in very good company about those people who got kicked out of University of Malaya. We're a very, very elite team, and we're very proud, and we wear the badge of honor. I'm with you, Chandra. I wrote this not knowing anything about what the panelists would say, obviously, since they were talking spontaneously. But it's uncanny that some of the things that I will be saying in this eulogy, this in memoriam, one Zawawi Ibrahim, actually have been brought up in what has been said. And I hope I can echo and resonate with what's already been said this afternoon. I'm going to read it, and I wrote it as a piece to be spoken. It's a piece of oral performance, if you like. And it's very much a eulogy towards our great dear friend. It was very early one morning, May 2022. A message from Hameer. A few minutes ago, Abba died. Shocked into wakefulness and a kind of immediate reckoning. Tears, yes, but also a warm glow, a kind of aura of recognition of what had been a cherished friendship for nearly 20 years. It would be a month before I could visit one's grave, together with Hameer. As we stood, the lowering clouds closed in, and we were assailed by forks of lightning, the growl of distant thunder, an operatic soundscape. We came to reflect. We came to speak to him, to offer thoughts and prayers, to remember. Recalling his singing voice, I felt the need to squat down beside him on the touchable earth on which mourners had scattered fresh flowers, to caress the soil where he lies. Once again, a moment to reflect. There have been many, many other such moments to reflect in the nearly past 3 years. There's a famous line in Shakespeare's Hamlet, and one was very, very familiar with Shakespeare's tragedies, a consequence of his secondary education in rural Malaysia in the late 50s and early 1960s. Maybe that's hard to believe today. It is spoken by the ghost of Hamlet's father. Adieu, adieu, adieu. Remember me. When you get to a certain age, it becomes inevitable, unremittingly so, that friends you have known, people who have shaped your life, pass on. They die. And equally inevitably, this brute fact demands an answer to the question, how should we remember you, the departed? How do we remember you? I want to answer that question today in relation to one in what would appear on the surface to be an entirely personal way. But as I hope to show, that personal trajectory of life and the encounters they engendered were also political. Embedded in the society he reflected on so deeply. He was, for me, the embodiment of the progressive, organic intellectual, actively participating in and articulating the concerns of the outsider, the marginalized. He spoke truth to power. And it seems to me that he was able to do so because he inhabited this rich cultural hinterland that you've all been speaking of. A hinterland without borders and always inquisitive, always questioning. I first met one shortly after Shahril Talib invited me to join the Asia-Europe Institute as a senior research fellow in 2004 and found me a place to live in University Tower. He was keen for me to meet an old friend. They'd been at Monash together, who was living in a ground floor apartment and who'd recently returned from Kuching. First impressions are strong. A warm greeting from one, sporting a sarong, hair tumbling to his shoulders. Shamsul, Shahril, Wan and I were of this same club, or maybe cult, talking 10 to the dozen, ushering us into a living space that had been transported from Sarawak. Beautiful matting, wall hangings and artifacts, a painting of a tree of life. One disappeared almost immediately, leaving me with bashful Kaisha and engaging Hameer. Rendra was nowhere to be seen. To prepare what? Food, bites to eat on the first occasion. And then the first long conversation, reflecting on the times we lived in, music that we liked, films we'd watched, journeys we'd made. It would be a conversation that would roll on unceasing like a river over the years. Music was close to both our hearts, and we shared many favorites. The singer-songwriters of protest, and above all, Leonard Cohen, whose lines, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." I always took those lines to be one's watchword. And then there were the blues and world music and everything. His tastes were very eclectic. And he was, as many people have said this afternoon, the consummate songwriter. Mencari America, Perjalanan Hidup, KL Blues, so many great songs written for himself and, of course, some of our greatest performers, M. Nasir, Rami Sareb, Khadija Ibrahim. I think that for one, music was the most indescribable of the arts, and that may be why and what makes it the most powerful. It is perhaps the creative force best capable of giving voice and shape to our most deeply felt experiences, our most layered longings, of containing them, but then expanding them all at once. Music, I think for one, was the supreme language. A language for the exhilaration of being alive and of making a difference. There is an essay by John Berger, another old friend of mine who died not so long ago, that could have been written in honor of one. In that essay, John says this: "A song, when being sung and played, acquires a body. Again and again, the song takes over the body of the singer, and after a while, the body of the circle of listeners who, as they listen and gesture to the song, are remembering and foreseeing." I like to think that part of what we are celebrating today is precisely the remembering and the foreseeing of the song that one sang and sung again and again. A song fills the present while it hopes to reach a listening ear in some future elsewhere. It leans forward, further and further. Without the persistence of this hope, songs would not exist. And then there was film, something nobody here has touched on. Film was a medium that brings together all the elements that energized one. Storytelling, cinematography, sound design, dialogue, character. Reflecting the passion for both the global and the local in the arts, One and I hatched a proposal to Shahril to set up a film club here in this auditorium. We called it Kakikino, Friends of the Cinema. Every Wednesday, we'd screen the best of world cinema, from Korea to Thailand, from Senegal to Egypt, from Brazil to Mexico, as well as European art house and American indie offerings. And who would have guessed? There was an audience. Each week, 100 or more people would come by, watch the film, and talk about it eagerly afterwards. And once a month, we'd screen a film from the burgeoning Malaysian indie scene, Amir Mohammed, Tan Chui Mi, and the first ever public screening of Yasmin Ahmed's Sepet, with Yasmin and Sharifa Amani on stage here to answer those questions, and the 15-year-old Hameer enthralled in the audience. After I left AEI, we were homeless for a while, until one negotiated a slot at Finas over by the zoo, very appropriately. It was the same setup, and we gradually built up an audience in the same way, until one fateful day. It's an interesting story, since it tells us a lot about the cultural politics in this country. On the very day that the new Kakikino at Finas was about to be launched by His Honor, Rais Yakim, then the Minister of Culture, Arts and Heritage, together with the Finas House Journal, Cinema Malaysia, for which both Juan and I wrote, I get a panic phone call from him. Go and get a copy of Berita Harian, an unusual request. And there, splashed across 3 pages of the art section, we finally made the headlines. Why was Finas screening film Lucha? The reporter thundered. Of course, he was referring to our films, even though he confessed he had not actually watched any of the films. And we were thunderstruck. One tried to use his connections to head off the gathering storm, but to no avail. We got caught up in a much bigger agenda of the culture wars. Foreign films are decadent and pornographic. Yasmin Ahmed should be banned. Malay culture is under assault from a Western Zionist conspiracy. How could we possibly face down this reactionary posturing? So Juan and I decided to call it a day, but we wore our new names, Raja Film Lucha, as a matter of pride. A year later, I got a phone call from the new director of Finas. Sorry about what happened. Could we borrow some films from your library for some of our outreach work? By the way, Kakikino lives and thrives today, but in my arts center in Penang, Hikaya. Music, films, and of course, there was the writing. I was privileged to be Juan's editor for just about everything he published from his book with Jun-E Tan onwards. In fact, every single thing that was mentioned on stage, including the inaugural lecture, oh my God, I edited it, believe me. The very prescient account of how the digital media were remaking the political landscape, right through to his last major piece of writing, published in November 2021, a coruscating essay
on how the new economic policy had singularly failed the Orang Asli and indigenous populations of eastern Malaysia, even when they were being corralled into the Bumiputra wonderland. In between, there were very fine essays on music, on indigenous storytelling, on the foundering of developmentalism, on the captive mind, on the peasantry and proletarianization, on counter-narrations of identity, and so much else. I want to say a little bit about my role. Editing is such an intimate task. You read the words even more closely than the writer who penned them. Isn't that true, Adil? And the editor has a double loyalty to the writer, yes, but also to her reader. We are part proofreaders, part therapists, part boosters, blending the role, I like this, of meddler and midwife. Unlike some thin-skinned academics, one was a delight to work with, engaged and responsive, and always with insights drawn not just from his scholarly knowledge, but once again from that protean cultural hinterland. It's again. And together, we always followed the words of a wise man. I won't even tell you who it is. Actually, it's Stephen King. When you write, you spend day after day scanning and identifying the trees. When you're done, you have to step back and look at the forest. We always stood back together and tried to understand the whole forest with its rhythms and its cadences. I was also blessed to write with one. We wrote together. Our very first such foray, is in the book that you mentioned, The Globalizer, which I edited, is an essay on the filmmaker who, Yasmin Ahmed, who should be banned, by the way, as a storyteller. I think it still stands as my own personal favorite piece of all that I've written. And it was written with one. Just allow me for a moment to read the opening paragraph that One and I talked about for half a day, and then we wrote in half an hour. It speaks to something that's close to both of our hearts. And I'll quote from the very opening. Storytelling is a capacity that seems absolutely natural and even constitutive of our humanity. Little could be more affectingly human than an imagined scene of a mother or a father telling a child a story, or of children sharing tales with each other. An inability to tell stories is experienced as isolating, a source of great sadness even. To tell a story, then, is to share a need to imagine that our lives belong to something greater than itself, that our own actions and words matter, that we make a difference, that we have something to say, and therefore a sense of our own agency. We are, it seems, compelled to narrate. Stories help us to distill the great pageant of life, from its cultural creation myths to small everyday encounters, peopled by major historical figures or an unknown every woman, drawn from expressive invention or mundane reality. As Joan Didion once put it, we tell stories in order to live. One was a great reader of stories of others. He has a very fine introductory essay in Akira's novel Hamba, Slave, for example. Or, as was mentioned, he relates the storytelling of the Penan people of Sarawak as they mourn for and fight for their traditional lands. But one was a great storyteller in his own right. For me, and Shamsul, you mentioned this, perhaps the most remarkable single piece of sustained writing, at least in his recent years, was that essay, The Anthropology of Remembering. A unique I think, among Malaysian scholars. Through a sustained account of remembering the ethnographic details of his childhood in coastal Terengganu, one posits how much remembering represents variants of both collective identity and memory and individual identity and memory. In his words, remembering should be considered a form of agency which empowers local imaginings and is a mediator of social change, transformation, and identity. Like a chronicle of a death foretold, one had already found at least one answer to that injunction of Shakespeare. Remember me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gareth. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude today's Memorial Forum, we are honored to invite Distinguished Professor Dr. Rajah Rasiah, Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Institute, to deliver the closing speech. Please welcome Distinguished Professor Dr. Rajah Rasiah.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm not going to hold you all long because I have a class just a few minutes from now. I just wanted to mention that Hameer sent me his books 2 days before he passed on, asking me to distribute them. The Malay Laborer Behind the Window of Capitalism. That was the book that was originally published by ISIS, revised by our Chong's outfit. Yeah, but the publisher was him, right? Or you? Oh, but yeah, Pak Chong, I'm right on that. But let me mention, I've known him for 44 years. And each year, wherever he was, he communicated with me. Because the time is not long, I'll just mention that. As I finished my PhD, I wrote to him, there's something you want? He said, buy me a berry. So I bought him a berry. So that's how the communications were on many different things. But the thing I wanted to announce now is the book. I felt passionately, unlike say Sharil Talib book, I was only interested in giving a chapter. But unfortunately, I had to do the book because the Sultan started talking to me about it, whether he have done it. But this particular one, I was committed to do it because of the friendship we had, the many things he wanted me to do. So I wanted to do something in his area. And I didn't know him as a wholly anthropologist as such, but he wanted me to work on labor, the laborer. So I'm going to write that chapter, probably the first one that will be similar to the sort of work he would have done. But if you look at the introduction, and I welcome anybody else who feels passionately about him, it's not something that's focused on just anthropology as such. It's largely social sciences because it feels, as what Professor Shamsul mentioned just now, he didn't fit into anything as such. He did whatever he thought he should do in an analytical set of lens, which we'll call social science. In a way, Amartya Sen would have referred to as philosophy. Reason doesn't have any disciplinary boundaries. So if you have any time, please, you can get it from Adil, with the introductions already done. And it's captures a lot of work at that time, the electives I did, including Chandra Muzaffar's work, Kamal Saleh. Interestingly, I spent more time with Kamal because, in fact, I spent a lot more time with him, and therefore was driven a lot, towards him. And then we're going to have a memorial session. He too passed on. He too passed on, and in May we're going to have that. I told Adil to fix the time because Khazanah is interested in organizing that session with me here. And of course, this time around, we're not doing a fast script with too many fast scripts already done by me. I'm going to take his chapters because he wanted to do a book. In fact, I took him to Cambridge where I even got him a fellowship and so on, but he didn't finish the book. But he has done some chapters, interesting chapters. I will combine some of the chapters and get it as a book, a research monograph, that one. So with that, thank you very much. I really am happy to see so many of you showing the passion and the patience as well to stay back and listen to what we are saying about Zawawi Ibrahim. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Rajah. We invite you to stay on stage as we invite Professor Zawawi's family members and Mr. Gareth Richards to receive tokens of appreciation from Asia Europe Institute. May I invite Dr. Norsha Saleh to the stage? Mr. Rendra Zawawi. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to inform you that we do provide light refreshments in the foyer below, as well as books from Gerak Budaya and Just that are on sale for you to browse around. We will also appreciate if you can scan the QR on the pillars to give us your feedback on the event. Thank you so much for your participation, and we hope that you have a pleasant evening and a safe journey home.